students wanting to make apps, right? Which is great, it's fantastic. And what regularly comes up is an app where it has sports data, where someone's collecting data about a specific sport. It might be tennis, it might be football, it might be basketball, whatever sport it is. Students want to make an app based on sports data. And it's a pretty common thing, it's a pretty common idea and pretty common concept. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a sports data app right now from start to finish, all the way through in Python, and that way students have a base to start from. It's designed to be changed, to be manipulated, to be used in whatever way that you want to use it. It's a very, very simple app that I'm going to make, but it gives you a starting point. Right, and the idea of all of these videos are they're starting points, they're helpers to get you started on the right track, rather than just using AI to say, build this for me. I want you to actually build it yourself and learn the concepts. So here I am in Idle. I'm using Idle because I like to use Idle. You can use Visual Studio Code, you can use something else if you want, but I like using Idle to start with. I think it's simple, the layout's easy for students. So I'm going to start with a brand new file. Okay. Now, here's my brand new file, untitled, nothing there. And I'm going to save that straight away. I'm just going to save as, and I'll save it to my desktop, and I'm going to call it basketball. Right, so I'm going to make a basketball app, right? So I'm going to call it basketball, and I'm going to make, essentially what I'm going to do is make a simple app that inputs players' data, maybe 4 things, score, assists, rebounds, fouls, right? So it inputs 4 pieces of data, and then it graphs that data and it shows you some sort of statistics based on that data. So it's a pretty good little app actually. So I'll go through and I'll get started. Now to do this, we're going to make a GUI in Tkinter. So the first thing I'm going to want to do, well, the first thing I say to all my students is to put a comment in at the start, right? So I'm putting a comment in, basketball app for computer science. Okay, so I've put a comment in, I'll put my name, I could even put the date in there if I wanted to. It's May 2026, and we're going to start this app. Now, I'm going to import Tkinter. Now, Tkinter is the program we use in class to make GUIs, right? So you've all done that before, you've all imported Tkinter before, and when I say as TK, that means I don't have to write the word Tkinter each time, I can just write TK. Now, from Tkinter, I also want to import a thing called message box, because we're going to use a box to show some information as we get the stats and we. Just let me write this. As we get the stats and we work out some play, I want to display them up on a box on the screen. So essentially, that's what I'm using, message box, right? Now we could do a SQL database backend using MAMP like we've done in class and like you'll see on my other videos. But I'm not going to do that today because I want to make this a simple video for any students that they can pick up and work straight away. We're going to use what's called a SQLite, which means Python will make its own little database and save it in a file next to wherever your app is running. All right, so it's a light version of a full SQL database. It can store information. It can do, for the purpose of what we're doing, it'll store everything correctly. It'll do everything right. So we're going to import SQLite. Now the other thing I'm going to import is the maths library that we use in class, and we've used this a few times to plot some graphs, right? So you don't have to recreate the wheel. What you can do is use some of these libraries that are in there and use them to help you. So this maths plot library is going to help us plot some graphs. It's going to do, we might do a bar graph and a pie graph and maybe a line graph. We might do that, but all we have to do is use this library, and there's lots of documentation online about how to use this library, and this tutorial is probably a good way to get started to show you how to use this library. Now, normally what I would do at the start here, I would go through and put in my how to set up my database, right? So that would be normally the first thing I'd do. Then I would go through and I would probably set up the functions, and what different functions are going to run when I click different buttons and do different things and that sort of stuff. But it's kind of, in my head, I've got this application ready to go, but for a new person learning how to do the application, it's probably better starting the other way around, where we design the app first and then we go through and add the functionality. So we're going to use what I've used several times before is a simple basic GUI program that we've used before, which makes us the most basic GUI. But instead of just copying and pasting, I'm actually going to write it out, right? So so that you guys can see this is kind of how we make it, right? So I'm going to call this the main GUI, and I'll write this will be redesigned over time. Okay. Be great if I could spell. Designed over time. All right. This will be redesigned over time. Now, normally what we would do in class is we would write window.tk. Just not having a great day. Windows equals tk.capital T lowercase k brackets. That's what we would do, right? And that would be a window that pops up on the screen using a GUI that we could do something with. However, for this program, I'm going to have 2 or 3 windows pop up. So I want this first main window to be the base window, to be the actual main core window. I want it to be, like in a tree, I want it to be the root window. So I'm going to call it root. So root equals tk.tkinter. And then I'm going to go through and alter this root, right? So first thing I'm going to do is put a title on it. And I'm going to call this Team Stat System. Stats System. There we go. So I've got a title for my root window. And then I want to give it some size, right? So let's give it some geometry. And we're going to go 500 by, 600 to start with. Okay, so there's going to be my size. And if I could spell today, that would be even better. Geometry, right. So that's the first part. That's the first little bit of the window that we're going to do. Now we need to think about what we're going to put in this window. And I can kind of copy and paste here a little bit after I make the first one. We want to have some input boxes, some entry boxes, essentially boxes where the user is going to input some information. So the first thing I want to do is tell them what information I want them to input. So I'm going to give them a label first, right? So this label essentially is just words that come up on the screen that say, this is what I want you to do. So we're going to put it in the root window. That's what the comma root is. And we're going to put some text in here, and the text is going to say, and let's start with player name. Okay, so the player's they're going to enter their name, and let's pack this in. Now remember, we've talked about, again, in class, pack means to actually prepare this label and get it ready to put into the window. Sort of like you pack your suitcase ready to travel, you're packing this label together ready to put onto the window. Now, if we've got a label there, we still need some sort of entry, right? So let's call this entry name. All right, so the person's going to enter their name, and we're going to equal a tkinter entry box. Remember, with a capital E, and we'll put it in the root window. Now, we've made this box, but we haven't packed it in. So we need to do the same thing we did a minute ago, entry underscore name, and we're going to pack it. Okay, so like I said, pack is where you sort of prepare things and get them ready. Now, there's a great little start, right? So I've got TK label, root, it's going to say player name. We've got an entry box underneath where it says player name, and it's going to be put in the right position directly under the name. Now, I want to have 4, 5 entry names, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this, and this is what I say to the students in class. Don't work hard, work smart, right? So, okay, so there we go. We've got a few name and then 4 others. Perfect. So let's work out what we're going to call these others. So the first one, we've got enter their name. Next one, do points. Because remember I said basketball, right? So how many points do they score? How many rebounds? How many assists? And how many fouls? Okay, so now I've got 5 different titles there, and I've got different entry boxes. But the problem is, each entry box is now called entry name exactly the same. And it can't be that. They've got to be different, each of them. So we'll leave player name. Let's make this entry 1, which means we're going to pack entry 1. Let's name this one entry 2. And we're going to pack entry 2. Let's make this entry 3, and then we're going to pack entry 3. Let's make this entry 4, and then we're going to pack entry 4. So now we've got 5 different entry boxes. We've got the player name, the points, the rebounds, the assists, the fouls. So when the user opens up the GUI, that's what they're going to be faced with. They're going to be faced with, how do you enter this data? What data do you want to enter? Now, when they enter that data, essentially what we need to do is we need to submit it. We need to say, okay, the data's ready to be submitted. And so to do this, we're going to use a button. And a button, remember, capital B, we're going to put it in the root window, and we're going to put some text on that button. And the text we're going to put there, we'll put submit data. Submit data, yep. And this one, we need to have it do something, right? So we need to tell it that it has to do something. So we want to command it to do something. Equals, and we're going to call it, let's call it submit data. And then let's submit data, yeah, that's right. And then let's pack that on the screen as well. And we'll put a little bit of padding around this one. Let's pad it. Let's make it go down a little bit. So let's pad Y. So let's go pad the Y axis equal to 5. Okay, so now we've told this to submit data. So that means we want to run a function called submit data. So let's copy that. Let's go up to here. Now, normally you run your functions at the top here, so I'm just going to put a little hash up here and say, these are my functions. Okay, and then I'm going to have a function here, def that, close that. Let's see, will that do? Oh, and the colon, of course, at the end, right? So I'm going to put a colon at the end of that. Okay, so later, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to write a function so that when they click this submit data button, that function actually runs. I'm not going to do that yet. I'm not going to waste time creating that function yet. I'm getting the actual design done first so that you guys understand how this works. Right, so, and there'll be a group of functions. There'll be 4 or 5 functions in here, not just this one submit data. So that's the first part. Let's make sure we save. So Command S, I'm saving that file. Right, now, what else do we want to do? If we're using a database, we should have the player name, but we should also have a player ID, right? So if we want to do a search later, if we want to, let's say we want to, I don't know, show the statistics of player number 2, say, for example, they're going to have an ID, right? So they're going to have some sort of identifying, unique identifier saying who they are. And we can't use their name because you could have 2 Nicks, or you could have 2 Johns or Pauls or whatever on a team. So there needs to be a unique identifier. Now, if you're not sure about this, you can watch the database videos where we talk about a primary key and a unique identifier as a primary key. So this is not a video about databases, but essentially we still need to have some sort of unique identifier. So I think I'm going to create, when we do the database section of it, the SQLite section of it, I think I'll create an ID. So right now I want to be able to view the ID and I want to be able to view the player's name. Right? So if the user comes in, enters all of this information, I want to use this information, so I'm going to need to know their ID and their name so that we can use this information. So I'm going to create another button, and again, I'm not going to recreate the wheel. I'm just going to copy this button I've already got here. I'm going to paste it there. This time, instead of saying submit data, this time I want to view player, or the players. What do I want to view? I want to view the player's ID and name. Okay, so I want to view the player's ID and name. And I want this is going to have to run a function as well. So instead of having a submit data, let's have view player. Okay, so there'll be a function called view player. So now that I know there has to be a function called view player, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, okay, at some stage I'm going to have to make another function, and that function is going to be called view player. So now I know I've got to make at least 2 functions because I've got 2 buttons here that are calling a function. They're asking for something to happen. So I need to know that I'm going to have to do that. Okay, now let's save that and let's have a quick look and see what happens. do that. Okay, I'm glad I paused. Right, so now let's continue. On this section of the video, I want to put a... Right, now let's continue. Now I want to add a pie chart, essentially. I want the user to be able to enter an ID and then click a pie chart and show these statistics, to show the points, the rebounds, the assists, the fouls. I want to kind of be able to show that on a pie chart, right? So how am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to create a label that says pie chart. Here is the pie chart for the person. You can enter the ID of the person because we've just got the view player's ID. You can enter the person's ID to get the pie chart. And then if you hit enter, their pie chart should come up, right? So let's start with one of these entry boxes because essentially we're doing an entry box. We're doing another entry box in here. We want them to enter the ID. Right, now, what we want to do here is we want to show the player pie chart. In fact, let's write show player. No, let's go player pie chart by ID. That's better. So let's go player pie chart by ID. So our label is going to say player pie chart by ID. So there'll be a little label there. And then we want an entry, and we can't have entry 4. So let's call this entry underscore player underscore ID, so they know they're going to enter the player ID, and it's going to be an entry and it's going to be a route. That's correct. And then we need to pack this. So we're going to underscore player underscore ID. So that's going to be another entry box, right? So it doesn't do anything yet. It's just another entry box, right? That's going to be there. Now, if there's an entry box, we need to have an action that goes with it, and we need to have a button that causes that action to go with it. So we've looked up, we've entered the data of the person, we've submitted that data. We've looked up the player names and the IDs. We've got the ID that we want to see a pie chart of. So now we need to click that, type that ID in, and then we need to click a button to say show that pie chart. So let's go down here, and we're going to say create another button. I've just copied and pasted the button from there. This button, instead of saying this, it's going to be show player, not players, let's just do player pie chart. Okay, so up here it's saying enter the ID you want to see, and then click this button that says show the player pie chart. Now, obviously, that's going to need a new command, right? It's going to need a new function. So let's call this one, and I'm trying to use meaningful function names. So we're going to call this show player pie. So if you then go back and look at this, you'll say, oh, I kind of understand what this button does. It runs a command called show player pie. So it means I need that function up there. So let's copy that, and let's put it in here. Def show player pie. Now, you'll notice that a minute ago it had a little pink box around here. That's because this code is incomplete. It has errors in it. It's missing something to happen in here, missing something to happen in here, missing something to happen in here. So Python knows this is not going to run correctly. This is going to error until I put something in there, so that when these buttons are pressed, something actually is likely to happen, right? Now, for the purpose of like a placeholder, we could just put a print statement. Print... let's put submit data, and then, because then we know that function's been pressed. Or we could put in here this one, view player, and then down here we could put in something like show player pie. Now, these are going to be removed, right? These are only placeholders. These 3 lines here are only placeholders so that Python does an error, so that it says, oh, the function actually does something, right? So we will remove those 3 print statements shortly, but it's just so that we don't have errors in our code right now. Right, just going to save that. Okay, now, we've shown the pie chart. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to show bar charts if you entered 4 or 5 different people. Basketball teams are not one player, they're 5 players on the court, normally 10 players overall. So we want to have lots of data for lots of different people. Now, if we assume that the user has gone through and put in 5 different players with all of this different information, then we want to see some bar graphs to see overall who's scoring the most points, who's getting the most rebounds, who's getting the most assists, those sorts of stuff. So let's create another label. All right, so I'm going to copy this label in here. So I'm going to get my label here. I'm going to copy that. Go down here. Oops. Right, go down here. Press paste. I'm going to paste that label. And this time the label, I'm going to say, let's just call bar charts. Okay, so it's a simple one. It's called bar charts. Let's put some padding in here. Let's pad Y. In fact, let's go down a bit further. Let's get away from all of that stuff that we had up the top. So let's pad it maybe 10 this time. So we're going to move it down a little bit further so the bar charts is separated from everything else, right? Now, we want, how many bar charts? We want 4 bar charts, and we want the 4 bar charts to show the bar charts. Okay, let's think about how to do this. We want to have a button that when you click it, it shows each of the bar charts. So let's start with the simplest format. Let's go with button, brackets, root. Let's go some text in there. And this text is going to say points bar chart. Points bar chart. Okay, now we're going to want it to run a command. Now, this one's a little bit different. I don't want this command to run straight away. I only want this command to run once all of the data is entered and the button is clicked, right? So what we do is we use this little function called lambda. And what lambda does is it says, okay, the function's sitting there, it's ready to go. Don't run it when the program starts, only run it once it's clicked. Now, that means if someone clicks it and there's no data in there, we're going to have it say something like, there is no data, there's no data to be run. But at this stage, we just don't want the function to run straight away. We only want it to run once it's clicked and there's data in there. So we use this thing called lambda. It's something we could go further into in another video, but for the purpose of this, lambda is what we're going to use here as the command. We're not going to instantly run a function. We're going to say, wait until I tell you what function to do. Right, now, we want to have a bar chart here. So we're going to make a function. So what we're saying is, lambda, don't run the function yet, but this is what the function is going to be called when you click it, right? So I'm going to make a function here. This is what's going to actually run when the decision is made to run it. We're going to say show lowercase bar underscore chart. So we want to show a bar chart, and on the bar chart, we want to see points, comma, and we want to see some sort of comparison. So compare to other people. So let's go points comparison. Okay, so it'll compare the different people. We need to close our overall root bracket. I didn't close that yet, did I? That bracket's in the wrong spot right there. That text bracket, remove that. That should be there. So we want to close that bracket, and then we want to pack this together. Okay, now, again, as we go through this may not be crystal clear to you right now, but as we do it, you'll understand a little bit better how this works. Essentially, I'm making a button. I'm putting it in my main window, and the button's going to have the text points bar chart. It's going to have a command ready to run, but it doesn't run until the data's in there and until the user clicks the button. And the function it's going to run is called show bar chart. So I better copy that, and I better make that a function up here as well in my function section. So let's define another function and show bar chart, and we're going to have it like that. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm going to do another print statement. And this print statement will be show bar chart. Okay, so we can test our program essentially and see if it works. Now there's our first button, but we want 4 of these. We want 1 for points, 1 for rebounds, 1 for assists, 1 for fouls. So again, I'm going to copy and paste this 4 times, right? So I go down to here, I go Command V, return, Command V, return, Command V, and let's change these words from points to rebound, rebound bar chart to assist, bar chart, and then let's go to fouls, bar chart. Now I need to change these points. It's going to be correct. This one's going to be rebounds, and we want rebound comparisons. Rebounds comparisons, rebound comparisons, rebounds. Let's put rebounds, plural. Right, assists, and then assists. And then fouls, fouls. Okay, so now we've done all of those. Now, that's essentially it for the main GUI. That's what we want. We need to just run that GUI. So we're going to put our root.main loop, right, which is just going to run our GUI. And that should actually be it. That should be the main section of the GUI ready to go. Obviously, I wrote here, we're going to redesign this. We're going to make it look pretty and put a background in and make it look much better. But we want to get the functionality working first, right? So that should be it. Now, I've got my 4 different functions in here. I've got information that's going to be entered. The problem is, at the moment, where is the information entered? If I go and click submit data and it goes to my function, it doesn't go anywhere because I haven't set up the SQL database. But let's just have a look at it and see how it runs right now, right? So hit save, hit run, run module. All right, so there's something wrong with my geometry here. I need to just go through and make sure that I haven't made a mistake here. I've probably made a little typo here somewhere. So let's have a quick look at the geometry layout of my page. Okay, so I can see what I think is the problem here. It says root geometry 500 by 600 with a capital X. So if I make it a lowercase x and I save that, let's run it again. And that's correct. And here is my screen that comes up on my screen, right? So pops up on my window, pop-up GUI. It has player name, points, rebounds, assists, fouls. So they're my entry boxes. So if we look at our code where I said we're going to make 5 entry boxes to start with, this player entry box here, you can see it says player name, there's the entry box. Points, there's the entry box. Rebounds, entry box. Assists, fouls. So they're my entry boxes. Then I had a submit button directly under that, and I padded it down by 5. It didn't really make a huge difference, but there's the padding down by 5 for that entry box. Then I had a view player ID and name, and then I had player pie chart ID, where you're going to enter the ID of the player because you're going to get it from this button, and you should be able to show their pie chart. Then I put a bit of space in here, put the heading bar charts, and we've got the 4 different bar charts. Now at this stage, this is not going to work very well. It's not going to do anything, but it is likely to print some things out on my screen, right? So I said run the command submit data if I submit data. So for example, if I put in some stuff, Nick hit 21 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 fouls, and I submit data. Now it doesn't do anything, it doesn't give me any stats, it doesn't store it, doesn't record it, but you can see it prints out submit data because here we said command submit data and it was to print out submit data. So I know my functions are working, they're talking to each other, but they don't do anything yet. We're gonna solve that problem in the next little bit, right? But at this stage, that's how that's gonna work. So let's go right up to the start here. And I think the first thing I want to do before we even start looking at how the functions run, I think I want to set up the database first so that when the data is entered, we're going to store this information, right? So let's go with database. Okay, and let's say this is a SQLite. This is an SQLite database, but we could use MAMP if we needed a more solid backend. Now, we don't need a more solid backend, right? We're just using this little light. It's only a little program. This SQL database that we're going to create here will work perfectly, all right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a connection, and we're going to make this little database here. Now, remember, we've imported SQL in here. We've imported SQLite 3 in here, so we can do this with a really simple command. And it is make a connection to a SQL SQLite3.connect, and that database, we're going to call it stats.db. Now, what that line actually does, right, so you guys know, it makes a new file. The new file that it makes is going to be called stats.db, and it'll save that file next to your Python file. Wherever you have your Python file, this database will be next to it. And if you have to change your database, you'll have to go and modify this stats.db file. You can do that through a SQL query and those sorts of things, but this is the actual database. So instead of running MAMP and having a database stored online or on a local host, it stores it in a file next to your Python file. Right, now we want to connect to that. So let's go C equals connect. And we want to connect the cursor to that. Okay, so what we're saying here is, let's create a variable called C, and if that variable C is called, make a connection with a cursor to this database, right? So cursor meaning the flashing square, so you can edit the database, right? So essentially, here's make a database, here is how to connect to that database. We've done that. Now, we want to store the information, right? And we've done, like I said, we've done a lot of work on databases, so you should know how to do this, but players table. So we're going to create a table for players. We're going to say we want to connect to the database and execute this command. So the C is the C from up here, and the .execute means run this command, essentially run this SQL query, right? Which is what we're going to do. We put in 3 inverted commas. And then I'm going to whack return a few times here, and then I'll close my 3 inverted commas, right? Now we're going to run our command in here. And our command is a normal SQL command that you could use on the MAMP database. You could use it on the SQLite. You could use it anywhere. It's a normal SQL command. We're going to go to caps lock, so we've got capital letters. And we're going to put create a table if not existing. So in other words, if this table doesn't exist, create this table, right? And the table we're going to call players, and we'll call it lowercase because it's going to be the name of the table. We'll put a bracket, another bracket, and in here, let's go to the next line. Let's put player underscore ID. So that's one thing that I want to score is a player ID. I want it to be an integer. I want it to be a primary key, and I want it to auto increment. Let's close that. So that's my first part. And the second part of the table, I want it to be a name. I want it to be text, and we could say it's unique. Okay, so that will do at this stage to create our, because we're doing, like I said, a simple table. So I'll explain. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to create a table if it doesn't exist, and the table is going to be called players. It's going to have 2 main things. It's going to have a player ID, which is going to be an integer, which is going to be our primary key, and it automatically increases each time. We don't need to make an ID each time. It'll do it by itself. We're going to have a field which is called name, and it's going to be text, and we're going to say that it's unique at this stage. It wouldn't always be unique because you might have different, you might have multiple players with the same name, right? But at this stage, we're just going to leave it as unique. So that's going to be our players table. Let's make another table in here to store our stats, all right? So we'll call this a stats table. Now, if we're using 2 tables, straight away that says to me we're using a relational database. We've got 2 tables that are going to have to talk to each other. They're going to have a relationship, and they'll integrate with each other using the primary key from the top table up here will become a foreign key down here on the second table. Would be great if I could spell today. Right, now I've copied that line execute because we're going to execute this command as well. I'm going to go capital letters and we're going to say create table. Come on, let's just copy it from above. Right, go to here, create table. We're not going to call this one players, we're going to call this one stats. Okay, let's do a bracket. Now, let me think about this. Let's do an ID, which is going to be an integer. We're going to call this a primary key, and it's going to auto increment. So that's the same essentially as here, except this player ID is the primary key on the players table. This ID is the ID for the stats table. It's a primary key for the stats table. So they are two different IDs. They don't relate to each other. They're different. Right, now what do we want to have in here? We want to have player ID, which is going to be an integer. We want to have points, which is going to be a real number. Remember data types, think about our data types. We're going to have rebounds, which is a real number. Real number meaning it can have decimals if it needs to have decimals. Assists, real number. Fouls, which is going to be a real number. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say that this player ID, we're going to use a foreign key from this table, right? So this player ID, we're going to say, go to this table, get the player ID from this table and use it as a foreign key on this table. So let's write that. Foreign key in bracket player ID. And let's say, where does it come from? It references the players table, and on the players table it's also called player underscore ID. Right, now we need to close the overall bracket, and then we need to have three. Did that do that automatically? No, it didn't. We need to go 1, 2, 3, close bracket. Okay, there we go. So now we've got the first table created, we've got the second table created, we're using the primary key from here, we're bringing it in as a foreign key, and you can see it references the players table as the player ID. So that should be correct. Now, if they run that, we want to commit those changes. So we're going to go to the connection and we're going to say, if that runs at the start of the program, commit those changes and make that file, okay? So that's our database. We've set up our database section, so that's fantastic. I'm pretty happy with that. Next, we'll go on and we'll start to look at the functions and how these functions can then work with the database. So we're storing information now, and we're going to do that by having these different functions happen. So for example, the person goes in, they put their player name, they put their points, they put their rebounds, they put their assists, they put their fouls. You click Submit Data button and that goes and runs the Submit Data function, which will run up here to the Submit Data function. Now at the moment it does nothing, it just prints the word Submit Data. What we want to do here is connect to this database that we've just created at the top here and put all of that data in there. And then we're going to have a section that clears it off the screen as well, so that when the next student or the next player is added, there's no data already sitting there. It's got to be clear, right? So this is our next section. How do we do submit data? Okay, so I said to you before that this line of code here, this was just a placeholder. It was just there to help us to get started, to make sure that we had when we had a command here, it jumped up and there was a function ready to go. So I'm just going to delete that line, that print. We don't want to do that. And we're actually going to do something that we haven't really done in class very often. We've maybe done it once or twice for the whole year. And that's called a try and except. And what that does is it tries to do one thing, but it also, if that one thing doesn't work and it gets an error, it accepts that error as well, right? So we don't get big red errors all over our screen. It's kind of a way to test if the data's there. If it is, fantastic, we'll use it. If the data's not there, then we're going to give you an error. We're going to say, oh, wait a minute, you haven't entered the data. It's kind of like a trying something before you actually commit to doing it, right? So to do that, we actually do try with a colon. and we're going to put some information in here. And we also then have to do further down, which I'm going to do that now actually, is the accept. Okay, now what we're going to accept is if there's a value error. So in other words, if there's no data in there, we're going to say, okay, the value is missing. So we accept that value error. Now, if the value is missing, we want to have a message. And I spoke to you before, right at the very start, I said we're going to use a message box to tell us a message if there's an issue, if there's a problem, right? So we're going to say show error, and we want the error message to say, we're going to say error, comma, enter valid numbers. Okay, so I'll explain the error section first before we go on and say what are we going to try, because what we're going to try is going to be a lot bigger, right? So, but for this section here, we'll do this. Now, when they enter data into here, let's say instead of putting points, they put the word Fred or the word dog or something like that, instead of putting a number. And it gets to here and it says, all right, let's try these numbers. And if they're not numbers, it's going to say, wait a minute, that's not a number, that's a word, right? So it's a value error. It's going to give me a value error. And on the screen, we'll get this message, error, enter valid numbers, right? So it's a way of checking the data as it's being input to make sure that we're getting something that's the right information. The other thing is, if you open your program and you say there's no database created, there's nothing made, and you hit submit data straight away, it's going to say, well, there's no data in there, right? So it's going to say error, enter valid numbers. So this is a way of testing your program right at the start to make sure that the user has entered the correct amount of data. Right, now what is it we actually wanted to try if they did enter data, right? So if they did put some data in, what do you want it to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to get the name out of the name box, right? So they've entered name in here. They've entered name in this little entry box down here, player name. We've called it entry name. So we want to get that entry name. That's what we want to get, is what is the entry name. So I've just copied that word entry name. So let's go to here and let's say name equals whatever the entry name is. Let's get that from the box. And let's strip out anything that doesn't need to be there. So if they've accidentally put 2 spaces at the end of their name, let's get rid of those spaces. If they've put a space and then they've written their name, let's get rid of that, right? We only want the name. We only want the data that's in there. We don't want extra spaces or any of that sort of stuff. So we've made a variable, we've got the entry name, and we've stripped out any extra information that we don't want. Now we also want to get the 4 pieces of data: points, rebounds, assists, and fouls. And we know that they're entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, entry 4. So let's get those as well. And we want to store them as a real number, as a float. We want to store them as a float, right? So let's give them a variable. Let's call them I1 equals, that means information 1, data number 1, information 1. Let's store it as a float. And let's do the same thing we did before. Let's go down here and say, what is it we're trying to get? We're trying to get entry 1. Right, so we're going to go here to entry 1. We're going to get entry 1 dot get and put 2 sets of brackets. And we don't need to strip this out, right? Because it's just going to be a number. It's not going to have spaces and that sort of stuff. It's just going to be, you could put strip in there if you wanted, but we don't need it. So that's going to be our first one. That's going to get our first piece of data. Now, obviously, we're lazy, so we just copy and paste. And this one's going to be information number 2, information number 3, information number 4, and we're going to say it's from entry 2, entry 3, and entry 4. Now, so we've got our 4 bits of info, our 5 pieces if you include the name. We've got our 5 pieces of information. Now, we better do a bit of a check on this too, right? So inside here, the first thing we should do is we should check that the name is a name. If not name, right? So in other words, if it's not a text bot name, if they haven't put anything in there, if they've left that box blank, let's send a message in a message box. Let's show this error. And the error we're going to show is, might as well just copy that. this into here, Command V, error, let's put enter player name. So in other words, they've tried to enter the data without entering a player's name, right? So if the name is not correct, it's not that it's incorrect, it's spelt incorrectly, more that if it's empty, if the box is empty and they haven't done that, they have to go back and they have to put a name in there correctly. So that's just a little error checking, a way of checking errors. Now let's insert this information into the database. So remember up here we created a table for the player name and the player ID, and then this second table for the points and those sorts of things. So let's enter that information into the database. So let's put a comment in here, insert or get player. Right, so I say get player if we're going to be searching for the player as well, right? But at this stage, it's going to be about inserting the information into the player, right? So let's go with C is our connection. We want to execute a command in SQL, and the command that we want to execute is select player ID from players table where name equals question mark, because we don't have a name yet, right? So where the name equals question mark, right? And then let's put in here comma, bracket, name. So it's saying, essentially what it's saying is, just give me a second here, let's get the result. Let's store the result in a variable called result. And let's fetch this one. Right, now, essentially what this 2 lines of code is doing, right? It's connecting to the SQL database. It's doing a SQL query. It's saying select the player ID from the players where the name equals, and then this question mark says whatever the variable name is, which is what we created up here, the variable name is. Find that information. Now, if the results come back and say, okay, here's the information, we've got it, then we're going to have to alter the table, saying that that person's already on our database. We're going to alter the information that's in there. But if it finds that it's not there, that there's nothing there, then we're going to add the player to the table. We're going to add it to the database. So let's go through and do that if statement. So if, and sorry, whatever it finds in this query, it stores in this variable here called result, right? It's saying connect to the database, fetch the results, whatever the results are, store them in this variable here, result, right? So I'm going to say if result player underscore ID equals result 0, right? Okay. What this is saying is, essentially, if there's already a result in there, if there's a player ID already in there, send us back the results and let us know what's the index location of that result. Where do we find that result? What's the player ID of that result, right? If it's already in there. If it's not in there, then we want to add the player to it, right? So it's, again, another testing mechanism. Have we already entered this player onto the database? Have they already got data in there? Or if they're not on there, let's add them, right? So this is the else section in here. So if they're not on there, let's execute a different command. Let's execute, and the command that we're going to do is insert. So we're going to insert into the players table, and we're going to insert the name, right? And the value in that in that column is going to be whatever we say is the name, right? So we're going to say comma, bracket, name, comma, close bracket, close, yeah, second bracket's closed, that's right. And then player underscore ID equals C dot last row ID. Right, so let's explain what that actually does. So it goes onto the database. It checks if the player ID is already there, and if it does, it returns the result of whatever the player ID is. Otherwise, it'll go, okay, there's no player there, so I'm going to execute this command. I'm going to insert into the players table in the names column the value, which is this question mark, which is our variable here, names, which we got from up here. So it's going to insert that name into the table. And it's going to create a player ID from whatever the last row ID is. So if there's an ID there that's number 1, this will go and make the next one, which will be number 2, which is our auto increment. Or if there's an ID there of number 7, it'll make the next one, whatever it is. From the last row, it'll make number 8. It'll make number 8, for example. So that's how we've inserted the player name, and they've created them an ID. We've got them an ID in our database. Now what we want to do is we want to insert the statistics. We want to insert the stats. And it's going onto a different table. It's not going onto the players table. It's going onto a different table. So let's put a little comment in here. Let's say insert stats. Right, and how are we going to do this? We're going to execute a function on the database, and the function's going to be 1, 2, 3 inverted commas. Let's do another 1, 2, 3, and then let's just put that down here. Right, so what are we going to execute? We're going to say, let's just make this look a bit neater. Insert into the stats table. Insert into the stats table in the columns player ID, in the points column, in the rebounds. You've got to get all this spelling right, because if you don't, the columns won't line up. It won't understand which column you're entering information into. It has to be exactly the same as your database, right? Right, so we're going to insert into the stats table using the columns player ID, points, rebounds, assists, and fouls. We're going to put in some values. All right, and the values that we're going to put in, let's put in, let's just do question mark, comma, 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 question mark, comma. So there should be 5 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't need that last one. Okay, so there should be 5 pieces of information. Now, what am I going to insert into there? I'm going to get these these triple commas here. Right, because that's the end of that statement, but it's not the end of the bracket. So I've got to put that there. So what am I going to insert? I'm telling you there's 5 question marks. What am I going to insert into there? Well, what I'm going to actually insert is the player underscore ID, right? So we're going to insert that. And better put this in a bracket, player ID, because we're going to 5 question marks here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this bracket, I need 5 pieces of information. So the first one we're going to put is the player ID, which we've already just got from here. So we already know what the player ID is going to be. We've already got that, right? So we're going to get the player ID, and then we're going to want to insert these 4 bits of information up here, these 4 I1, I2, I3, I4. So we could do exactly that. I1, I2, I3, I4, right? So we're going to insert those 4 pieces of data, close that, close the overall bracket, which I've already done. Let's just put that there so it makes it a bit cleaner. Okay, so there we go. That's what we want it to do. Now, we want to make that connection commit the changes. So if that all worked, it's going to commit the changes. And then we also want it to tell us that it worked, right? So let's do a message box. And the message box is going to show some info. And the information it's going to show us is saved. What is it saved? Data submitted successfully. Okay, data submitted successfully, right? So if the data went in, if it actually worked, if it's stored it in the database, it's going to say data submitted successfully. Now, here's one little extra bit that I want to do. I want to clear the boxes. So we've got 5 pieces of data in the boxes. I want to clear those entries after we've done that. So let's make a new function. Clear underscore entries. And put the 2 brackets. So now I need to make a function called clear entries, all right? Because I want it to clear what was in there so that you're not left with data in your boxes on the screen. So here, I need to make a new function, def clear entries, colon, and we might as well do that straight away, I think, rather than mess around with it. Let's go through and make that clear entries. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go to my, what did I call them? Here, entry name. I want to go to my entry name box. Just going to do this in a quick way. And then we had entry 1, entry 2, entry. Okay, right. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to delete whatever's in there. We're at position 0, tk.end. Okay. So essentially what this does, this goes to that entry box, which was called entry name. And starting from the very first position to the end of that entry box, it's going to delete everything that was in there, and then it's going to just leave it as a fresh, clean box ready to go. Okay, so this line here empties your box after this function is run, and it runs to there. So after the data's been saved, after everything's gone in and it's all correct, then it runs this function. And this function will go down and it'll clear that box. Now essentially that line, we want to do that 5 times because we want to clear each of the boxes, except they're not called entry name, they're called entry 1. The next one's called entry 2. The next one's called entry 3. And the next one's called entry 4. Okay, let's save that. Now, you really need to test, right? We need to, in fact, we should put a comment in here saying what this does, right? This option here, this clearing the entry box, boxes after data entered. Okay, so we're clearing the entry boxes after data's entered, right? So and this is why I put comments in, so you guys know what all this sort of stuff does, right? Let's save that and let's run it and see what happens. Now, obviously, the stats, all these other ones down here, they're still not done because we haven't created the variables for those. In fact, all of these are not going to run. The view player ID should run and the submit data should run, right? So view player ID, is that going to run yet? No, the view player ID is not even going to run either. So only the submitting data, that's the only thing that should run right now, right? So let's run this, run the module, see if I've made any typos. There you go, I made a typo, right? So it's important that you guys check these things. It's important that you guys make sure that when you're writing your functions, that you've got the right amount of brackets at the right amount of places. So let's have a look. What have I done here? Open bracket. I don't need to close the bracket there. Right, so that shouldn't be closed there. Let's save, let's run it, run module. Okay, so let's enter some information in here. Nick, points, 21. Rebounds, 8. Assists, 5. Fouls, 1. Submit. Now, that didn't work because that data is still there and that should have cleared the data. And if we look at our program here, it's saying try this, and if all of that worked, we should have got a message that says save data successfully, submitted successfully, and it should have cleared the entry boxes, but it didn't. And I also noticed in the background here, my error file came up here, and it says operation error near value, syntax error. Syntax error means a typing error of some sort of mistake I've made there. And it tells me line 56. So window, show line numbers. So I show my line numbers. I go to 56. And 56, there's an error in my code there somewhere. And it's pretty obvious. I want to enter the values, plural. I want to enter multiple values. I don't want to enter one value. I know it is only one value. It's entering to players only the name, but the actual SQL code needs to have an S on it, right? So that's a SQL mistake that I've made there that should have value. So I'm going to save that. I'm just going to hide my line numbers again. I'm going to save my file. I'm going to run it again. And hopefully we're better off this time. Again, no errors at the start here, so we're okay. Let's go back to here. I want to see this as I do it. Right, name, Nick. Points, 18. Rebounds, 9. Assists, 7. Fouls, 2. Submit data. Now, here's the difference. I've got my little pop-up window that says data submitted successfully. This is my message box window. So that's good. And if I hit OK, which just means I'm at this line of code right here, if I hit OK, those entry boxes should clear, which they did. They just cleared. And if I look down here on my text down here, I have no errors in my actual code running here. So now that's correct. That one little S gave me a bit of an error, gave me a bit of a fault, right? But that works. So now we've got it so the data is entered correctly and it works in. Now we've got to work our way down through these next three functions. So the first function we want to look at is how to view the players and view the information from the players. We also want to look at how to make a pie chart from that single player's information, and we want to show a bar chart from all of the players' information if we had multiple players in there. So let's go ahead and start off on the view player section, right? Because the view player section, it's obviously the next place we should start. With the view player section, I want to make a new pop-up window. I don't want it to be a window within a window. I want to make a new little window pop up that shows me all the players' names and all the players' ID. So we're going to make a new, like a breakout window, a second GUI window that comes up. Okay, now we want to work on this view player section here. So I'm just going to put a little comment in here first to start with. I'm going to put view players. Let's call it breakout window because I don't want it to be stuck in there. And on this window, I want the ID and the name. Okay. So essentially, what can happen is when you click this button down here, it says view player ID and names. A new window opens up. And it shows the the player names and the player IDs. And we can leave that window open so that when you get to the pie chart down here, you can see the different players with their IDs. So you could then click the button to do the pie chart, right? So having this as a second window that opens up here and stays open is not a bad idea. So we're going to create this player breakout window. It's breaking away from the main window. Now, right at the start, I said to you, this was going to be our root GUI down here. Bottom. In fact, let's get rid of this error stuff in the background. This was going to be our root main window. But this new one is going to be a different window. It's not going to be the root main window. This could be called something different. Getting rid of this placeholder that I told you about view players. It was just there as a test. Now we're just going to get rid of that, and we're going to create a new GUI window, and I'm going to call it Win. I'm not going to call it Window because Window is kind of the standard one you use all the time for everything. I want it a little bit different, so I'm just going to call it Win. And again, this is going to be a TK window, but it's not the main window. It's one level up, I suppose, from the root window, or one level down from the root window. So I'm going to say top level in bracket, and the main level is actually the root window, right? So this is going to be a window that pops out from the top level, which is the root window, right? So this is going to be a new little one. Let's give it a title. So this is all similar to what we did right at the very start when we set up our first window. We're going to call this one players database. Oh, players database, that'll do. Right, now we're going to give it some geometry, give it a size. And let's make sure we don't make the same mistake that I made before. Let's make it 400 with a small x, 500. That'll do. That'll do for the size. And let's give it a background color. We want it to be different from the other thing. And essentially, this is not the styling. I don't want to do all the styling and that sort of stuff. The styling is up to each student to make their own decision about how they do styling and how they do different things. But just to show you that this is a breakout window, we're going to do some style. That'll do. There we go. Now, at the top of this window, I want to have a heading, right? So let's put in a heading. Let's call it header. And we're going to call this header, it's going to be a label, because a label is one of the main things that we use in Tkinter. It's going to, you've got to remember to have a capital L. That's a mistake students make all the time. It's going to be in the window, not in the root. We're putting it in the window. It's going to have text. Now, this is the same as I did when we first created down here, where it's in the root, then it has text, then it has a command, then it has a pack. Instead of doing it wide like that, I'm doing it tall so that you guys can see there's different ways to do it. It's exactly the same concept. It's just done a different way. Player list. Let's call this the player list. Put a comma after it. And this sort of styling is similar to the way that you lay CSS out when you're doing CSS styling. So it doesn't hurt to use different formats or different ways to do things, especially if it helps you understand or it keeps a consistency. Right, so what I'm doing here is I am choosing the font that I want to use for my heading. So I am actually showing you a little bit of styling here. I'm going to make this bold. Let's close that bracket, close the comma. You'll notice at the end of each line, essentially, I'm putting a comma in, and at the end of the whole thing, there should be a bracket here. It really is like CSS styling, right? Now, FG in Tkinter is foreground. Now, remember, I'm talking about the writing, the heading here. So the main writing, I'm actually trying to make white here, and the background behind the writing, the BG, I'm making it the same color background that I'm trying to make the background here. In fact, I'm just going to copy that because that's the easiest thing to do. And I'm going to put that here. And essentially, that's like a black background, right? I don't need a comma after the last one because I've got my bracket that closes the lot out. But what I do need to do is I need to pack this, right? So you always have to pack these things into like a capsule, I suppose, that then can be placed on the screen somewhere. And let's move this down a little bit. Let's go pad Y by 10 pixels, right? So I'm going to pad that by 10, put that down. So that's given us a new window with the title on the window, like on the little bar up here, we'll say player database. It'll be 400 by 500 with a black background. It's going to have a heading that says player list, which will be the font Arial, 18-point bold, white, on the black background, and that should be the first thing we see on the page. Now we're going to create what's called a frame, right? A frame's like a window within a window or a box within a window that we can start to put items in or put information in. So in this frame, we're going to say tk.frame frame. It's going to be placed inside the window, and we want it to have the same background color as that other thing. I just copied and pasted that background because I knew I was going to use it a couple of times. I will be using it a couple of times, right? Now we want to pack this frame, dot pack. But the difference here is we want to make this frame do a few things. So essentially what I'm doing is created a window. Inside that window, I'm putting like a second window that I can start to put information into. Like the actual window itself is like a border around the outside, and then the frame is the section in the middle where I can put things. So I'm going to pack this frame. I've made a frame with a black background, and I'm going to put some in. Now, I want the frame actually to fill up the whole window. So I'm going to say fill up both, which means both X and Y axes. Fill the whole thing up. And I want it to expand. If the window expands, I want it to expand to be true. So I want it to expand to fill up the size of the window no matter what it does. Now, I would also like to have two columns inside this frame. And this is why I made a frame to start with, because I don't want it just to be inside the window. I want it to be inside a frame so I can manage the columns. I can move their width, their height, where things are placed in there and that sort of stuff. So I want to make two columns. And I want to put labels on these columns, right? I want to put them, I want one column to have the player ID, and I want the second column to have the player's name, all right? So that's what I'm going to do now. tk.label, so remember we're creating a label. We're going to put this inside the frame, so we're not putting this inside the window, we're actually putting this inside the frame, right? So this is a little bit different. We're going to give it the text, and the text is going to be ID, the player ID. Let's give it some more information here. Again, we're getting a little bit into styling here a little bit, but that's okay. Width of 10. Foreground, let's make the writing yellow because we've got a black background, right? So let's make the writing yellow, and let's keep the background black. Now, I know it seems a bit silly. I've written the background color in here, the background color in here, the background color in, the background color in here. Tkinter is can be at times a little bit tricky to work with, so you want to make sure that you continue to make it the way that you want it, and you can enforce those rules by saying always have this black background, always have this black background, right? So I'm enforcing that rule by saying it over and over again. Right, we're going to put a font in, and in here we want to have, well, let's use the same font that we used at the top. So let's use Arial, and let's make it a little bit smaller. We don't want it to be bigger than the heading, and we do want it to be bold. The reason I'm using bold is when you've got writing on a black background, it tends to disappear a little bit. So if you make it bold, it fattens it up a little bit. Right, now this is the key to this little section here that's a little bit different with this label. I want to set this up on a grid, right? Because I said to you I want 2 columns, right? So I want this one to be in row number 0, the top row, and I want this to be in the leftmost column. So in fact, that's going to be column 0. So I want it to be in row 0, column 0. That's where I want that to be, and that's going to say my ID. So that's actually going to be top left-hand corner, right? So it's the first row, first column. That's where it'll be to start with. That'll have this label that says ID. Now, I want to do the same thing, but this time I want it to say name. So we're going to have a second label here that says name. So instead of having ID, we want it to say name. But it's stupid putting it in the same spot. I can't put it in the same spot. I actually want this to be a separate column. So I'm going to change this 0 here to a 1. So now I've got 2 different columns. This is the first column, we'll have the IDs in it. This is the second column, we'll have the names in it, right? So that's why I've made 2 different columns. Now, what do I want to do? In these columns, I want to collect the information from the database, and I want to see the player IDs and the player names. So we need to go back to our connection to the database, to connect up to here, to try and find this information. If you remember, when we did a connection, we did a connect, execute, and then we did something, right? So we're going to do exactly, in fact, I could just copy that, right? So we're going to do the same sort of thing down here for the viewer information. We're going to go connect, execute, and we're not going to have 3 inverted commas, we're just going to have 1. And we're going to say select player underscore ID, comma, name. So they're the 2 things we want. We want the player ID and we want the name. We want to get them from the players table, and we want to order by player underscore ID. So the player ID is a number and it's automatically incrementing. So we know that we want to order them in the right order. What you don't want is player 1, player 7, player 3, player 9. You want them in the right order, right? So we're going to order them via the player ID, right? So that's what we're going to do there. We close that. We're going to store that information. So let's store that information in a variable called rows. And let's fetch that information. I spelled that completely wrong. Fetch all of that information and store that into the rows. Okay, so that's what we've said. We've said store that into the rows. Now we've got to go through this row. We have to actually go through every single row of this, and we need to lay it out into these 2 columns, right? So we've gone and we've got the data. We've collected all the data off the database. We've got all the players' names and the players' IDs, but now we need to actually lay it in rows, okay? So we're going to iterate through the rows. So we're going to use a for in statement to go through every single one of those rows. So we will do it like this. I could use the word everything, but I'm just going to use the word I, right? The letter I, because we've talked about this in class. I represents everything in that array, right? So for everything in rows, what I want to do, I want to enumerate the rows, comma, and start at 1. Okay, so I need to explain what that's going to do. That's going to go into our array here, which is going to have all of our usernames and all of our IDs and all of our usernames. It's going to have them in that order, IDs first, then usernames. And what it's going to do is for everything inside that array, I want you to lay them out in rows starting at position number 1. Now, why position number 1? Because that's going to be the first ID, is going to be position number 1 or starting point number 1, right? So this is essentially going to say, okay, I found number 1. This is where I'm going to start. Next time I find a number, I'll go to the next row. Next time I find a number, I'll go to the next row. And that's a simplified way to explain how that works, but that's essentially what it is, right? So we need to say, what are we going to get? We're going to get player ID, and we're going to get name, and that's going to equal to the row, okay? So what we're saying is every time we go through, the first element that you find in the row, we're going to call that the player ID. The second element you find in the row, you're going to call that the name, and then you're going to go to the next row. Okay, so essentially that's what it's saying, right? It's saying that store the first bit of information, which will be the player, which will actually be from our database, the player ID, and the second bit of information from this query will be the name, and then you go to the next row, right? So essentially that's what it's saying. So let's put that information down onto the table. Right, let's go make a label, and we're going to put it into the frame. We're going to say the text is going to be the PID. So the first piece of text we want it to do is going to be the PID. Now I could have called that player ID again. I could have written it here player ID again. The problem is I want to work quickly, and I don't want us to get confused about every single time we call player ID. So I'm just going to call it PID this time here, and we put it in there. Width equals 10. What other styling do I want? I want foreground white equals white. That's got to be inverted commas. Have I still got that thing in my paste? No, I don't. Right, so let's go and just copy it because I'm lazy. Background black. Close that bracket, and let's put this in the grid that we already created. Let's put it in row I for whichever iteration that we're running through from our enumerate. Let's put them in column, we want it in the first column, and then let's maybe add some padding to that a little bit so they're not on top of each other, right? So let's go comma pad y equals 2, close the bracket, that's done. Right, so let's do the second one, then I'll go through and explain this to you one more time. Okay, and this time is going to be the name. Pad y row, in fact this needs to be in column number 1, right. Okay, so up here we created a frame, which is a window, and we made 2 columns. The first column is going to be called ID, the second column is going to be called name. We said here, column 0, column 1, right? So there's going to be a column 0, column 1. Then we've gone and we've done an execute on our database, and we've gone and collected all of the player IDs and all of the names. And we've gone here and we've stored that into a variable called rows. So essentially it's going to make an array with lots of bits of information. It'll have 1 and then the name, 2 and then the name, 3 and then the name, 4 and so on and so forth. So we're going to go through, we're going to iterate through that rows file, and we're going to try and work out what everything is. And we say for everything in rows, go through it and start at position 1. So start at the first position of the array. Whatever the very first thing is, call it the PID. Let's pretend we're putting it into a variable and we're calling it the PID, the player ID. The second thing in this iteration, let's call it name, and then let's say that's it, that's the end of that first row. So here we say, all right, make a new label, get the PID from whatever the first row is, and place it into column 0. That's saying row I, which means whatever row we're currently in, column 0, and then go and do the same thing for the name. Same thing, row I, column 1, so they'll be next to each other. The two things will be next to each other. Then this is going to loop back up here to the next thing in the rows. So if there's 100 players in it, this will loop 100 times, and we'll get 100 different IDs with 100 different names. If there's 5 players in it, it'll loop 5 times, because it's going to keep going through until it's done all of them, right? Till it's got through and done all of them. Right, so that actually should be about it. That should be a way to make a pop-out window, to run that pop-out window, and it should list all of the IDs. Now we can test that, right? And I think we probably should test that. Let's go File, Save. Let's go Run Module. Nothing's going there, so that's good. Here's my module. Let's just minimize this to get it out of the way. So let's, we should already have one player in there. So let's enter a couple more players, right? So let's say we had a player, John. John got, I don't know, 12 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 fouls. Submit data. And that was submitted successfully. So that should have been player number 2. Let's go Paul. Paul had 21 points, great game, but he didn't play defense. 2 rebounds, wouldn't give the ball 21, 2 assists, and 4 fouls. Submit data, yep. And then let's say we had Ringo, and Ringo scored not many points. He only scored 4 points, but he was great on defense. He had 12 rebounds. He had 9 assists, and he had 1 foul. Right, so now I know that I've got some data in there. I've entered the data 3 or 4 times. Let's see what happens when we click View Player ID. Now remember, this is what should happen. We've got a button here called View Player ID. It should run a command which runs View Player. It should run that function. We go up here to the View Player function. We should get a new pop-out window that's called Player Database. It's got a black background. It's got a heading called Player List that has a frame that you can't see, but it has 2 columns essentially. One column should have all of the player IDs, and next to that we should have all of the player names. So let's have a look. And on here, that's what's come out on my list. So there's something not quite right here. So we've got our player list, that worked, my pop-out window worked, my ID worked, my name worked, but for some reason we haven't got the names coming out here. So maybe I've done something right. I've made the text black. Let's have a look, see if there's anything there that I can click on. There's not. So maybe I've made the text black. Let's go and problem solve this error. Okay, so I don't mind getting these errors because it's what happens in real life when you're writing a program, and it's a good way for you to problem solve. Now, if you go over here to the left-hand side and you have a look, we've got an error message that's popped up. And the error message says, line 101, in View Player, PID name, you've written the word row. Did you mean rows? So let's go back to here, and this is what I said, the PID ID name, and here I've used the word rows, but here I've used the word row. So I need to make sure that's an S. So it says rows in there. And the error messages are great. Like, it's good that it tells me that that's the error. I could even go up again and say view show line numbers, and it'll probably show me line 101, right? So this little section here, and the fact that it tells me where my error is, that's good news, right? So it's told me that that's done. Let's go save. Let's run my program again, and let's see if it works better this time. Right, my player ID, here we go. I've already entered 4 or 5 bits of data, so I'm not going to enter anymore. Let's go View Player IDs, and this time, this is what popped up, right? So I'm much happier with this. Player list, it's got the IDs with the yellow heading, it's got the numbers, and it's got the players, and they're in order. So now if we understand this is what's popped up, we can go back and look at our code, and it might help explain a little bit better how some of this works, right? So if we go back to here, I'm just going to move this over fractionally so you can see it. Right, to about there. In fact, I'll just move that over there. Right, so here, we created a window first. Here's the window we created. That's this window here, this black window. We gave it a heading Player Database. There it is at the top of the bar, Player Database. We gave it an actual heading itself on the page, which is white with a black background, which was Player List, right? So that's worked. We went through and we made a frame, which is a big thing inside this window which you can't see. And essentially we made 2 columns, column 0, column 1. We had yellow writing on column 0 and we made it ID. There it is there. And essentially there's a hidden column there that you can't see, but it is there. Then we made one for name and we put it down through there. Then we went and did a search on our database and we collected all of the IDs and the names and we saved that into a variable called rows. Then we went through each one of these individual rows. We pulled out the ID and we pulled out the name, right? So we went and got them from the rows file. We pulled each of them out individually. Every single time the ID came up, we placed it white in column number 0 right there. every single time the name came up, we pulled it out and we did it there. Now remembering, it doesn't go, let's get all the IDs, let's get all the names. It doesn't do that. It gets the ID and the name of the first row, prints them, and then goes and gets the ID and the first name of the second row. Prints them, ID, name it. So that's how it does it. So that's how it does the list. And this window is good. It's long enough that I could have 10 or 11 basketball players in here if I need it. So now if we go back to our main program, we've got the player name, we can enter that. We've got all the way to enter all that data, and we can submit data. We can view the player ID. Now we want to have the player pie chart by ID, and this is why we've got this breakout window. I might say, okay, I really want to see how John's going. So I'm going to click here, I'm going to enter the number 2, and then I would click show player pie chart. But if you remember in our code down here, on that click, the show player pie chart by ID here, it says run the function show player pie. At the moment, show player pie does nothing. It prints out show player pie. So our next step is, how do we actually show the pie chart? Now, to make pie charts and graphs in Python, we really use this maths plot library, right? So this is the reason we imported this at the start. We're going to plot that information onto a graph. And in fact, we don't really do it. The program does it automatically if you just tell it where to get the data from. So that's going to be our next step right there, is to start to plot our individual pie graphs. So these are not our team pie graph, our team bar charts. This is just our individual pie graphs. So let's put a little comment in here, because you know I like to use comments. So I'm just going to put a comment here saying this section is for our individual pie charts. Okay, so this is for our individual pie charts. In fact, let's change that to lowercase. I like consistency. All my other comments don't have capitals in the middle. So let's just do individual pie charts like that. Right, now, let's get rid of this placeholder. We don't need this. That was just there to tell us that there was a function and it was working. We are going to use some of the items that we've used before now. We're going to use a few of the skills or the tricks that we've used before to make sure that this pie chart works. And the first one of those is we're going to use like we did with the entry boxes. So we had all of these entry boxes here, and when we went up to the top here, we went and we said, go and get the entry, go and get that information from the entry, right? So we're going to use the same sort of a get information here, and this time we're going to get the ID that the user enters, right? So remember, the player enters an ID, and that ID is the player that they want to see the pie chart of, right? So we're going to get that, and we're going to go to the, I think we called it entry player, player ID pie chart, entry player, right? So we called it entry player down here, right? So we want to get that entry player information. So let's go to my variable here. We go entry player, get that entry player underscore ID. It was underscore ID dot get. So we're going to get that ID, right? I'm pretty sure it was ID, wasn't it? Entry player ID, right? So entry player ID. So we're getting that entry player ID. Now, let's check to make sure that they've done it right. Let's use the same sort of error message box to see if they've got the right player ID. And again, being lazy, we could go up and we could steal this little message right here, which is if it's not correct, let's tell them that's not correct, right? So let's copy that bit of code. Copy and pasting code, it's really common. That's what people do to save themselves time and energy, right? So I'm going to say here, if not, and this time it's not going to be name, this time it's going to be if not, what do we call this, player ID, if not player underscore ID. So in other words, if there's no player ID entered, so we're checking here if there's a player ID entered. If there's no player ID entered, let's put up an error message. It's going to say error, enter player ID. Okay, so we want it to enter the player's ID. So there we go, that's going to enter the player ID. So that's going to give us an error if they haven't entered a message. So in other words, on this window, if I had nothing there and I clicked show player chart, it's going to give me an error because I haven't put a number in there, right? So that's the first thing, a little pop-up error window, which we like. We like that sort of thing. Now, what happens if they do enter a number? If they do enter a number, we want to do a query on the database. Now, we want to do a query for all of their data because we're making a graph based on this one person's data. So we want to collect it all. So we're going to go C execute a query on the database, and okay, trying to do it the fast way, and it ends up being slower. Anyway, okay, we're going to execute. We're going to select the points, comma, the rebounds, the assists, and the fouls. Let's do on the next line, from the stats table. And we're going to have a where statement where the player underscore ID is equal to, let's put question mark. Now we're going to have to tell it what that question mark is, right? We have to tell it what that where statement is, and we're going to go order by ID descending with a limit of 1. Right, now I'll explain what this is doing, right? We're going to the database. We're looking from the stats table. We're going to get the points, the rebounds, the assists, the fouls. We're going to get that from the player ID, from whichever player ID I tell it. Now, we already know the player ID up here is going to be this one here that the user's entered. So I'm going to have to put that variable in there somewhere, which I can do in just a second. We're going to order it by descending with a limit of 1, which means we're going to put it in descending order, but we're only going to get one piece of information from each. We're not going to go and get 5 different players' information. We're just going to get one, right? We're getting one player's piece of information. Finish that. Now, this is where I'm going to put in what the variable is, because we've got the question mark there. So I'm going to put comma and put the variable in there, player underscore ID, comma, close the bracket, and then we should be closing the second bracket, which I already did. I said trying to make it quicker, and it's actually probably a bit slower, but anyway. So there we go. So that's the query that we're going to run. Now we need to save that query somewhere. So let's call that row equals c dot fetch one time, close the brackets. Right. So we're going to collect that. Now we better check that there's data that has actually been collected. We can't say go and collect the data and there's no data for this player. So let's just check there's data. If not row, so in other words, if there's no information in that row file, then let's give another error message box. Let's just copy it from here, put it on here. Let's get another error message box and let's put no data, no stats for this player. Now, what happens if the coach goes through, uses this program, puts all the players' names in, but one player hasn't played a game yet? So there'd be no stats for this player, right? So that's why we were doing that, just to make sure there is data. Right, now, what else do we need to do from there? We're going to collect that information. We've done that. Right, we better also collect the player's name, right? So we've collected the points, the rebounds, the assists, the fouls based on this player's ID, based on this player ID. We haven't actually collected their name, so we better get their name. So let's do a C execute again. Let's just do a single one. We're just going to do a little select in here. So let's go here. C execute, select. And this one should be pretty easy. You guys should understand this by now. Name from players table where player ID is equal to question mark, close inverted commas. So I'm going to put comma, and then I'm just going to copy that there because I just don't want to write it all again. Player ID, close the bracket. Okay, let's save that as, not row, let's save it as name underscore row. So it's the name for the same row, and we're going to equal c dot fetch once. Fetch one, I shouldn't say fetch once. Fetch one, and we're going to save that there. Now, so we've gone through, the users selected which player they want. We've tested to make sure that player is actually in the system. We've collected their stats. We've gone through and made sure that they do have stats, and then we've gone through and we've collected their name. Now, we kind of want to put that all together. Do we want to check that their name's correct? Yeah, let's check that their name's correct. It shouldn't really matter, but let's put... All right, we're just going to check that they've got a name in there, right? So we're going to go player name. We're creating a new variable equals the variable that we just did a search for, name row at position 0, which is going to be the first thing that came in, which would be their player name. If name row is correct, don't do anything, else put unknown player. Okay, that was a silly little one-line piece of code, but I think it's kind of important. What we're doing is, after we've run this execute on the players on the database, right, we're checking that the player has a name, right? So we're saying this new variable player name, it should be the first thing in this name row variable that got executed, that got the search for, and if it's not, then it's an unknown player. So we're going to have to use the name unknown player. It should never happen, because the way we set up this data entry here was when they entered the player name in here, it was essential that it was entered, right? So when we went up, let me think where we did this, it was, if it didn't enter, the program wouldn't work. They had to enter the username correctly, right? So it was required. Remember, if they didn't enter a name into the name box, they get an error saying enter a player's name. So it's a requirement that they enter the player's name into there. However, this is just maybe a little safety net, safety bracket, that if the name didn't come up correctly, it'll put the name of unknown player. But it was required, right? So, okay, now we're going to go through and we're going to start to set up our graph. Now, on our graph, we want to have, we don't want it just to be 4 pieces of raw data. We want it to actually have titles so that you know what each of those 4 pieces of data are, right? So let's do this. Let's go label. Let's make labels equal, and these are going to be the labels that you see on the graph. Let's do square brackets, and let's put 4 labels. It's interesting when you watch someone else write a program, you get to see how they do things. I like to set things up first and then put in the information, but it's a good learning point. You'll see, and then they always talk about people type code or do code in different ways, right? You'll see the way that I do code probably is different from other people. It's not necessarily better or worse, it's just the way that I learned to do it, right? So yeah, it's interesting to see how other people type things. Right, so I've created 4 labels. There are my 4 labels, they're right there. Now, this is where we get to the tricky part. This is where we start to use this maths.lib up here, this matplotlib up here. We said matplotlib Python plot as PLT. So we're going to use this PLT. It's pretty important. This is where the tricky bit comes along, and it's not really hard for us. It's more harder for the program, right? So we're going to say PLT, which is the plot library. I want you to have a heading, and I want that heading essentially to be player pie chart. Oops, player pie chart. So that's the first part of our plot library, right? Next thing I want you to do is I want you to plot a pie graph. So I'm going to tell it to plot a pie graph, and I want you to use row, right? Now row is the information that we fetched from here, which is points, rebounds, assists, fouls. I stored it in a variable there called row, and I fetched it, so I want you to use the data from row. Okay, so that's the first thing I want you to do. I also want you to use the labels that I just created here, these 4 labels here, and I want you to place them in as labels. I mean, that's pretty obvious, that's pretty easy. Now, I also want you to make sure the percentages are as correct as they possibly can be. Like, I don't want them to be 5.87693. I want the percentages rounded. I want them to make sure that the percentages look correct on the graph. So there's a little one here called auto percent. And again, these functions, you're not expected to know all of these. These are things that you look up. I looked this up, right, to make sure that I got this correct. So this is how you would do the percent. Okay, and that'll give us a correct percentage on the screen. That'll make it look correct on the screen the way the percentage is. Again, I didn't know this. I needed to look this up. So you guys, same thing. You're not expected to know this. You're not expected, especially as a student, to be amazingly good with maths plot. You know, that's not the idea. The idea is you do your research, you put it together, and you create a good product. You're not being marked on, do you know this little thing? You're being marked on your overall product, right? Right, the next thing I want to do is I want to put the player's name. We did a search and we found the name. We called it name row. We did a search for that, so I actually want to put that player's name in here. And when we did this search for name row, we put it into this variable called player_name, all right? So we went and got that fetch. If it was right, we put it into player name. Otherwise, we put unknown player. So let's use that. Let's use that information. So let's go plt dot the title on the screen. So this is not the title of the window. This is the title on the screen. We're going to go and get that variable. I'm trying to use a few different methods of doing things here so you guys can see different ways to do things, right? So we're going to go and get this variable, close my inverted comma, and the variable we're getting is called player_name. Now I could have just kept calling this name. I didn't want to do that. I want to make it clear and sort of understandable if I can, right? And we're going to say, so whatever the player's name is, latest stats. So it could be Nick, latest stats, right? That's what it's going to be. And the last thing is we want to show the graph, right? Plot.show and close. Now, the key to this is this line right here. This PLT, make me a pie chart. Here's the data and make sure the percentages are right. All this other stuff is just styling and making it look pretty and that sort of stuff. It's not essential. What's really essential is that's what you wanted. You want to use that one line to get the pie graph to work. Right, I'm thinking I'm going to save that and run that, and let's have a look at it. Just while I'm doing this, I'll just put a comment in here because this next section is the team charts. So let's just go option here. This will be the whole team bar charts. Okay, so that I can put a space in there, save that. Right, so let's just check this section here. Let's go close out of these ones that are currently running. Let's go run module. No errors came up, so that's a good start. Here's my information. Let's go view player IDs. And we've got this view player IDs here. Here it is. Let's go and let's choose who we're going to look at. Let's look at Ringo. So I'm going to put a 4 in there, show player pie chart. Now we've got an error, right? So SQL, right? Oh, look, I spelled execute wrong, right? So this is good. This is, again, like I said, when you find errors, it's not too bad when you find errors. Line 114, I spelled execute wrong. So EXECUTE, execute, right? It'd be good if I could spell correctly today. EXEC, oh, look, and I copied and pasted the same error. Save. Let's try and run it again. Okay, no errors. Player ID, we know it's number 4. Show player pie chart. Oh, look, I've got something else wrong here. I wrote plat instead of writing PLT on line 138. 138 PLT. Save. Let's try again. That's what happens when you rush. Right, player number 4. Show pie chart. And what pops up is this. There you go. 15.4% of his day's game was on points, 3.8% was on fouls, 34% on assists, and mostly on rebounds, right? So that's pretty good that you can see that stat. That popped up for him. So let's do it for someone else. Let's do player number 2, show pie chart, and player number 2 was John, right? And see it says player pie chart up here, John's latest stats. The labels are correct around the outside, and these are his stats here, right? About how his game went, how the day went. So that's pretty good. That looks like our pie chart is working. Let's just do a test and enter a new player, and let's make these graphs, let's really check that these graphs are right. Let's give a new player here. Let's call them George. Okay, now we're going to give George really low points. We'll give him 1 point. No, let's give him 2 points for the game. Okay, so we should have a really small point section. Rebounds, let's give him a lot. Let's give him 30 rebounds. It's astronomical, but it'll do for the purpose of this. Let's give him assists. Let's give him 5, and let's give him fouls. Let's give him 5. Let's submit that data. Okay, let's check our viewer player profile to make sure George is in there, which he is. He's player number 5. Let's check George's graph. Now remember, we should have nearly no points, a huge amount of rebounds, and then a balance between these two. Player 5, show pie chart, and here we go. Now, oh wait, I might have the other graph open. That's interesting. Right, here we go. Came out better this time. There we go. So all I did was I hadn't closed that other window, so it made the two graphs on top of each other. So I closed that window and I opened a new window. Now, this is what's interesting. Points, really small. That's what we said. Rebounds, really massive, and then these two are equally balanced. And you can see the percentage is exactly right. So it's actually putting all the data onto the graph in the correct positions. That's the reason that I did that test then. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't ordering these in some strange order and just making it up. It actually did it correctly, right? So that's great. So we're nearly at the end of our program. The only thing that we want to do different now is we want to be able to show these bar charts for the whole team. I want to see all of the team's points, how much each person got. I want to see all the rebounds each person got, the assists, and then the fouls. So let's move on to that section. I'm going to close this window. I'm going to minimize this window, and I'm going to close this window. We're going to go, we're going to go down here. I still want to get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. We're going to go down here to the whole team bar charts. We're going to get rid of this placeholder, and let's go through and use PLT to make bar charts. Now, we want to go to this bar chart section here, but I want to go back down and talk about and just readdress the way that we set this up at the start. So right at the very start, I said to you, all of these other ones, we can press the button and the command runs straight away. But I didn't want these functions to run straight away. So I put in this command lambda, which is kind of like, wait, don't run this function yet, right? Don't run this function until I'm ready to run this function with the correct data. And I also said, run this function here, and I put in 2 pieces of information. So I put in 2 arguments for my function. So show bar chart, put in points and put in points comparison. And then this one would be show bar chart and put in rebounds and rebounds comparison, assist comparison, fouls comparisons. So I'm not just running the function. So up here, if I had command show player pi, right, that's just running the function. This one here, I'm saying run the function, but give it 2 arguments, right? I want it to give you send 2 bits of information to the function to run it. So when we come up here to the actual function, we need to receive 2 pieces of information. And the first piece of information we're going to receive is the column name. Okay, so that's what, if you go back down here, I'm saying I want the columns to be called points. And then the second piece of information is going to be the title, and the title of the window is going to be the points comparison or the rebound comparison or the assist comparison. So in here, I put column name, comma, title. So now those 2 arguments, when they come to this variable, they've got those 2 arguments coming in, and the 2 arguments are here. They're already made as text, as pieces of text that go into there, right? So that's the first part for our function. Now, when we run this function, we want to go and collect the information about these people, right? Same as we've been doing for all of these others. We need to go to the database and we need to collect some information. So I'm going to use this C execute that's spelt correctly this time, and I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that here. And I'm going to say, this time I'm going to put a little F at the start here, and that F means you're going to get some variable. You're going to get some information from a variable. And what we're actually going to get is the column name. That's what we're going to get, right? So this little F, you'll understand that in just a minute. Let me just close that, 1, 2, 3, close bracket. So let's put in what our argument or what our SQL request is going to be. Let's go select players. Now I'm going to do this different way so that you guys can see there are different ways to do a SQL query. This one, I'm saying players.name, which essentially is saying go and get the players go and get the name from the players table, right? So instead of me going through and going up here from select name from players, I'm essentially saying select from the players table the name. I'm doing a shortened way to do it. It's a concatenated way to do it, right? A different way to do it. And from the stats table, I want you to get, and what I want you to get is the actual column names, right? So I want it to get the column names. So I want to use this kind of variable here to get the column names for each of the columns, right? Now, to do that, I use the little f here and I use curly brackets here. And I say into here, column names. Column underscore names. Okay, so now I want you, column name, not names, see, it's name. Right, so I want to get that from there. Now I want to get all of that essentially from the stats, from stats. Now I want to join with the players table on the stats.playerID. And that has to equal the players table on the player ID. Now, this is really, really good for your IB computer science if you're doing databases and you're building an application, and this having a join in your program it shows that it's more advanced than just doing basic queries from SQL. So I need to explain how this works. This join says, all right, we want to join from the stats table. We want to join with the players table. So we're looking at this a relational database where there's two tables, and we want to get the stats table and we want to get the players table, and we want to join them together. We don't physically want to join them together. We want to collect information from two different tables. And how we're going to collect that information is we're going to go to the stats table and we're going to look up player ID, and we're going to make sure that that matches the players table for the player ID. So in other words, we're getting the right stats for the right player, and we're joining that on two different tables. For the IB, for computer science, even for IGCSE, having a join in your program will get you extra marks. Showing that you understand how a join works will get you extra marks, okay? So this is an important little section down here that we've added. Right, now we want to save all of that, and we want to save that as the data that they've collected from the connection to the database, and we're going to fetch it all, right? So we're fetching all of that data. So let's go fetch all there. So we've collected that and we've saved it into this variable called data. Now we better check and make sure that there's data in there. So let's go back and get our little message box up here, our error message box. Let's whack it into here, and let's say if there's nothing in data, then we're going to have an error box, and this error box is going to say no data, no entries. Okay, so again, this is just a test to make sure there is data for each person's name. If there's not, it'll say no entries. Right, now we need to work out how we're going to lay this out, how we're going to put this out onto the screen and make this work for bar graphs. And we're going to need essentially two things. We're going to need the name of the users, or the names of the users, because again, this is the whole team. Remember, this is not one team. This is not one person. This is the whole team. So we're going to need all of the names of the users, and we're going to need all of their values, all of their data, right? So we're going to create essentially two arrays, and those arrays are going to store that information, right? So let's create one called name equals, let's do square brackets, and we're going to say row. Is it row or rows? It's row, square bracket 0 for row in data. Okay, and then let's copy that. Return, Command V, and we want the names, but we also want the values or the data. But we don't want to call it data, let's call it values. And this one's going to be for row 1 in row in data. Right, so let me explain this. when we go through and we do our search on here and we collect our information, we collect it in a file called data, okay? Now, that file that we're collecting that information called data, we want to put it into rows, right? And so the first row, the first position of that data is going to be the name, right? So that's going to be stored in our first array. We're going to have our first name, and it'll go through and it'll collect all of the things at position 0 will be the name. So it'll collect all of the names. And then the next positions, we're going to put in the values, the data that goes with that name. Now remember, this is showing one thing, right? So for example, this will get Nick and his scores, or it'll get George and his scores, or it'll get Ringo and his scores. It's not collecting all of the data in terms of scores, rebounds, assists, those sorts of things. It's collecting one piece of information. So this row will put in the name of that person and what data they got. Then it'll go again, it'll go the next name of the person and the next bit of data they've got. Then the next name of the person and the next bit of data they got. And how it does that loop is this for row in data, right? So that's a for loop that's running through to make sure that it collects all of the names and it collects all of the data. They're essentially a for loop to do that, so it's collecting that information. Right, now, what do we want to show, right? What do we want to show on our graph, right? So we've collected the names, we've collected, say, how many points they've scored in the game. How do we show that? We want to show it in a bar graph. And we also want to show the whole team average, right? So if the team's averaging 15 points a game and one person's only averaging 10 points a game, well, we want to see that, right? So let's start off with working out the average. So the average, we might as well do the sum of all of the values, so all of the 5 players' scores. Let's sum that all up, and then let's divide by how many values there were. So you know that's how you get an average, right? Is the length of the values tells you how many averages there were. So if we have 5 numbers all added up together, you divide by 5, right? So that's how we're going to work out the average. All right, now let's start putting our graph together. We've got our variables for our names, we've got our variables for our score, we've got our average. Now we're going to make the graphs, all right? So let's use plot, and let's give it a heading for the actual window itself, and we'll just call this title. Now we don't need to write the title in. If you remember up here when we plotted a thing, I put in player pie charts there, right? But this time I'm doing it a different way. I'm using this argument that's been sent to the function, and I'm putting that in as the title there, right? So again, I'm trying to show you different ways that things can be done. The argument's put in there, it's being used here as the title right there. Right, now we want to plot bar graphs, right? So we're going to plot a bar graph, and we want that bar graph to have the names, we want it to have the values, and we want to label it, I suppose. We want to label it. Now up here, I made labels. I don't want to use those labels necessarily. I'm going to do it a little bit differently, right? So let's go into here. Let's put names, values, label this diagram with player values. And you could put player score or player whatever, but you'd have to change it every single time. So I'm just going to put player values, right? So that's going to make our bar graph. It's going to use the names, it's going to use the values, and it's going to be labeled player values, right? So that's why it's going to work. Now, I want to put the average on a line across the middle of the page, right? So on my graph, I want to plot. Now, I looked this up. Again, this is one of those things you're not expected to know all of these things perfectly. So I looked this one up as well. I want to put the average, and I want it to be a line across the middle of the page. Okay, now, so I'm going to explain to you this. This is going to plot for me a line, a horizontal line across the page, and it's going to show the average of the team. So here's the average of the team. It's going to go and get that average. My line style, I'm going to actually tell it exactly what I want it to look like. I want it to look like dashes across the middle of the page. I want it to be a red line, right? So that it's got a color that it stands out from everything else. And I'm going to label this line team label equals would be good. Label equals F team average, colon, and then I'm going to actually put the average in there, right? So let's go, that's why I had the F at the start, so I could put the average in here, which is going to be AVG colon dot 2F, right? So that's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that a line across the middle of the page. I'm drawing the line's going to be red. It's going to have a heading that says team average, and it's going to get the average and put it to 2 decimal places, and it's going to put it right through the middle of that thing. Right, now PLT, I'm going to give it a title, and the title, I'm going to use the argument. Right, so the title on the top of the window is going to be the same as the title that's actually on the screen. It's going to be the same title. Next one, I'm going to plot on the Y label, the Y axis. I'm going to call this the column name, right, which is the other argument that we had up here, right? Underscore name. So I'll have the column name on the Y axis. What else? In case the people have got long names, I am going to, I'm going to tilt their names a little bit. I'm going to tilt them on a rotation to 45 degrees so that their names will look a little bit like tilted at the bottom of the graph. I'm going to include a legend on this table, right, so that people can understand what it is. Don't need to say anything, it's just going to include a legend. Let's make it nice and neat and as best we can. Let's give it a tight layout. Close that. These are all layout. These are all inbuilt functions in Maths Library. Some of them I've used before, some of them they're fairly new, like the one, the average line that goes across the middle of the page. Hadn't used that before, so yeah, it's a learning curve for everyone. I'm learning things as well. Right, and then we're going to show the table, right? So that should be it. So these little things here, again, this is kind of styling, and that's why I'm going quickly over the styling section, because I want you to style things your own way. I don't want you to use my styling for all of this. I want you to find your own styling, but essentially that is the most important, that's the most important line, which is going to get the names, get the values, and make a bar graph. That's the most important line. The rest of this stuff is just styling to make it kind of look better, right? So that should be it. That should be the end of that section there. And I'm just going to hit save on that. I'm just going to file save. And let's run it and see how that goes. If I run it, run module. No errors down here, so that's good. Bring my window over here and let's have a look at the points bar chart. So I've got an error straight away, right? No such column stats points, right? So line 144. So somewhere I've made a mistake in there about line 144. So let's go and have a look down here at line 144. Right, 144. So something in my query here is not correct. I've asked it to do something. Stats in brackets column name. I didn't put a full stop in. I'm going to the players table to get the name. I'm going to the stats table, full stop, to get the column names, all right? So I've forgotten to put the full stop in there. That was the problem there. So let's save that. Let's run it again. Like I said, errors are good. They help you out. Let's go points bar graph. I've got another error, right? So this time it's saying line 219, no, line 144, show bar chart, player name, stats, column name, stats, operation, no such column, players.player ID. Okay. All right, so here's the mistake that I've made here. If you read the error really carefully, it says no such column players.player.id. It shouldn't be .id, it should be underscore. See how it's player underscore? So that should be an underscore there. Again, all of these little mistakes, these little typo mistakes, they're a pain, but they're good because they teach you not to make that mistake again, I suppose. So let's run it again. Bring my window over, points bar chart. Right, so I've got another error here. So I've got the length of values and the sum of value and the length of values. So is it value or values? So I need to go down here and check here. I called it values. So that means that has to have an S there. Save that. Run module. Bring it over here again. No errors on the startup. I put bar chart, and I've got another error. So has no attribute, I've spelt figure wrong, F-I-G-U-R-E, again, typos annoy me, but that's okay. Right, let's points bar chart, error, label, line 166, Y label, right, save. What other mistakes have I made in there? Ticks, legend, tight layout, that's correct. Show, right, let's try again. Run module, save. Bring it over here, hit points bar chart. Right, now, this time it worked. There's my first bar chart. Now, a few things I want to show. This is the legend, where I said show legend. Points comparison. So the argument for the function has come in and it's worked correctly. Here we have the names on a 45-degree angle for each person. Here we have my dotted red line, which is the average points for the team, and here is the points, which is the other argument showing how many points we've got. Maths plot library does the plotting itself, it lays the graph out itself, it does the amounts up here by itself, but I've gone through and done a few of these things, right? And that seems to work. Now that same function should work exactly the same if I do the rebounds. So if I click rebounds, I get a rebound chart, and you'll see it's slightly different, it's laid out differently because the maths library knows, all right, there's no space up here for the legend, let's move the legend over this side. Everything else should be exactly the same. If I do the same for the assists bar, the assist one comes up on the screen. Yep, that looks great. And if I do the same for the fouls one, the foul bar comes up on the screen. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of the app, essentially. We've got this great app that does everything, that runs everything we want it to. It's a basketball stats app. However, this is the point where you have enough information here to make a fantastic, brilliant application of your own. You should be able to go in and change this and manipulate it and make it look better, and you should be able to make the whole program substantially better. This is your starting point. This is your base. You now know how to do entry windows. You know how to store information to a database. You know how to call information from the database. You know how to join that information. You know how to make different graphs, okay? So from here, you should be able to create something that's just really much, much better than this little app. But this is a good starting point. All right, that's going to be the end of the video. And I hope this has been helpful for you creating your first app in Python completely that collects stats and does a sporting app. Remember, you can do this for any sport, right? Okay, as a footnote to this video, I've gone through and created I've redesigned this app to make it look better. Now, in terms of functionality, it's exactly the same, right? But a few people said, oh, you know, what's the app? The app looks ugly, so can you make it look better? So I've gone through and I've put in a background image, right? Nothing special whatsoever. I've created two windows here, two different boxes here within the main window itself. Now, if I click enter data, I get a breakout window to enter the data points in here. So instead of having them all in one long column like the version that we've just watched, I made a breakout window and I put them into there. It's exactly the same. The coding's exactly the same, except it just goes into a different window. If I click view players, that still gives me exactly the same layout or window that I had before, where we had the information from the different players in here. I've just put in some different stats, but this is basically exactly the same information that we had a minute ago in that last video. Now, the difference here is if I click player pie chart and ask me the ID up here. So I might say, Nick, I want to see his stats. I hit 1, I say show pie chart. It shows me in this window. It's not grabbing and dragging windows and moving them around and all those sorts of things. It gives it to me in this window. If I say points bar chart, it shows me in this window the points. If I say rebounds, if I say assists, or if I say fouls, it shows me all within the bounds of this one window. Now, if you're making an app for your internal assessment or something like that, this is much nicer. It's much more pleasing to look at. Functionality is exactly the same, right? But it's much more pleasing way to look at things. And so that's just an update on this file, an update on what you can do. Again, I'm not going to do all that styling for you. The styling is up to you. The way that you make it look is yours and what makes it personalized. This is just an example of how it could go in the future if you wanted to develop this app more.